Should you return your ROG Ally? Could this accessory make the Steam Deck even more comfortable? How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Deck Ready. This is my second news video this week, and we've got some huge stuff to get into. Right after my last video, Asus actually went ahead and released new BIOS for the ROG Ally, their BIOS number 322. It seems like they fixed some things and left other things alone. We'll get into that in a little bit, because the first thing I wanted to talk about is this new accessory for the Steam Deck that sort of looks like the Satisfy grip for the Nintendo Switch, which is something that I know a lot of people swear by, because what it does is actually make the Switch like a more comfortable Steam Deck, if you want to look at it that way. It adds grips to it that sort of emulate a regular old Xbox controller or DualSense, and because of that, it makes it not dig into your hands as much as the Joy-Cons do, because, you know, they're sort of like sharp edge, squared off little things that don't feel great if you have big hands, which is a big reason why I was so excited to get my hands on the Steam Deck in the first place. Now, the Steam Deck itself is like infinitely more comfortable than what we're dealing with over on the Nintendo side of things, so I don't think you necessarily need a better grip for it, but what I think this grip could actually provide is a little more protection. Look, I've had the Steam Deck since it came out. I had to RMA it a couple times because of light falls that basically broke the bumpers. They seem to be the most fragile piece in terms of buttons on the Steam Deck, so having something that provides a little bit of an actual bumper for the bumpers, I think would be pretty cool. This thing is called the Stealth Grip. I'm pretty sure they're trying to make Stealth Grip. It's not really a good way to spell it out because they spell it S-T-Y-L-T-H, which, you know, doesn't really look like stealth to me. But anyway, the criticism of their title aside, this thing looks very similar to the dbrand Kill Switch, or what you can get very similar to the dbrand Kill Switch from JSOX. The pricing on this thing seems to be similar to what you can get from dbrand and JSOX as well. It's 50 bucks for the actual just case, and then if you want the bundle that comes with the front cover, it's 80 bucks. I'm not someone who really uses cases on my Steam Deck, just to be truthful with you guys. I don't use cases on anything. Like, here's my iPhone 14 Pro. I replaced the phone enough where I feel like if I drop it and get some little dings and scratches, it's not going to be the end of the world, but I'm also pretty careful with my electronics. The Steam Deck is definitely the only device I've ever had where I've considered using a shell before, but I feel like the Steam Deck's included case that Valve gives you is more than good enough. It's padded, it survived some light falls that the Steam Deck itself hasn't for me in the past, and it's just a cool little case with the Steam Deck logo on it. I do understand the utility of some of the other cases that sort of push up the deck and give you a little kickstand and things like that, and of course the Kill Switch and JSOX's version also can give you a kickstand. I mean, the JSOX version can give you like an SSD add-on and stuff like a cooling fan for the back of your device. So there's really cool accessories out there. I just don't know how interested I personally am in a shell like this, but I do know how interested people are in stuff like the Satisfy grip over on the Switch. So I figured I'd bring it up here on the channel to let you guys know. And this is not an ad. This is not sponsored. It's just something I saw that I thought was kind of cool. All right, next up here, let's talk about the ROG Ally and this unfolding BIOS situation. So the timeline here really starts before the thing came out, when I was really aggressively messing around with it. I basically had it for around a week before it came out, thanks to my friends over at Xbox, who provided me and my friend Ray, who runs Xbox Ready, with a pre-release unit, and we both enjoyed it despite the fact that it not only had a lot of technical issues, but also had some issues that really made it not feel as well put together as the Steam Deck, whether you're talking about that thing at launch or now. But one thing that didn't really cause many problems was the BIOS version 317, which provided really good performance on the device for pretty much any game I threw at it. Specifically with Diablo 4, I could get 60 FPS in 720p at medium preset, balanced or quality version FSR 2.0, and then it turned out that the day one BIOS update 319 actually dropped performance quite significantly in a lot of games, like up to 30%, which I saw a lot of pushback on that on Reddit and in the comments on my last video. It was definitely around 30% in a ton of games, but the biggest issue it introduced for me personally was single frame stutters and dropping below the 60 FPS VSync threshold. Now, Diablo 4's VSync, the built-in version in the game, no matter whether you're playing on Windows, Steam Deck, or the ROG Ally, which is Windows and a Steam Deck kind of put together, it's just not great. And what I recommend doing if you're on an NVIDIA PC is using NVIDIA Control Panel to limit the frame rate there, and then also use the VSync that's built into that, because no matter what game you're playing, that version of VSync tends to work a lot better than built-in game VSync, and that is definitely the case in Diablo 4. Of course, on the Steam Deck, you can just turn off VSync and everything will be fine, since the Steam Deck's frame limiter has built-in VSync and it works completely fine in my experience, setting it to 40 Hertz and 40 FPS, which is awesome. But on the ROG Ally, if you turn off VSync, it can cause a lot of problems. And I was happy to figure out that AMD Radeon software lets you do per game performance profiles, just like you can on the Steam Deck or an NVIDIA Control Panel. So I turned on VSync in there and it seems to work a ton better than the actual built-in VSync. But even with those fixes, with the 319 BIOS, I was getting single frame drops, I was getting single frame stutters. I could not get anywhere close to a solid 60 FPS with that handheld when I was playing Diablo, even if I was plugged in turbo mode. And then when I unplugged it and played the game on battery, the frame rate was basically hovering around 50 FPS despite being in a similar TDP wattage to what I was using with it plugged in. So I downgraded the BIOS to 317 and magically all of those issues went away. So I was excited to see that right after I uploaded my video, Asus released new BIOS numbered 322, and then I read the patch notes and was like, Jesus, man, like the only thing they addressed is the fan curve on the device, which seems like a true band-aid fix if I've ever heard of one for the issue people are having with their micro SD cards getting fried. Now, I've definitely seen a lot of denialism on the SD cards getting fried. It has happened to a ton of people, whether they're using a 512 gigabyte, a 128 gigabyte, all the way up to a 1 terabyte micro SD card. And ironically, I went and popped the SD card out of my ROG Ally before I started filming this video after a long session with Diablo 4 the other night, and it actually stuck inside of the little tray, and I had to go and get tweezers and pull it out. So something was happening inside that tray, and it's not like the card was dirty or anything like that when I put it in, because it was a brand new Lexar card that I got and immediately put in the device and formatted to be used with the ROG Ally. So even that was sticking in there after just a night of playing Diablo 4 on turbo mode. So basically what this 322 BIOS update does is it switches the curve of the two fans when you're maxing them out. So the bottom fan is going to run at 30 decibels, and then the top fan that's underneath the SD card slot that was blowing all the hot air underneath the SD card, that one's gonna run at 35 RPM, and that really should mitigate the overheating issue. I've seen people saying that this is like a deadlock fix. I don't think it's really warranted to say that at this point. I think there needs to be extensive testing from this point forward with these new BIOS updates before we can really trust that they worked, because there is precedent with this device that not only have BIOS updates decrease performance on it, but then you go to Asus and their response is basically like, we couldn't replicate it, so you're wrong and we're not gonna do anything about that. And then that's evidenced by the fact that this new update that's 3 weeks after the one that tanked performance by around 30% with a lot of games does not address that issue in really any way. So because of all of these issues, I've seen a ton of videos here on YouTube basically built around the idea of should you return your ROG Ally, and I'm just gonna be real with you guys. If I had bought this thing for full price for $700, especially if I didn't have a Steam Deck, I probably would have returned it. It's just not in a state where I feel like it's worth charging that full premium asking price for, even with that 1080p screen and good performance of the Z1 Extreme. The issues that this thing has have totally mounted up to a point where I spend more time fixing problems on it than I do playing games. And because of that, what I've done is just set it down most nights and switch back to my Steam Deck. Even though Diablo 4 runs at 40 FPS at the same preset at 800p on the Steam Deck, it's just a better experience for me overall, because all I have to do is go to the home screen, hit the play button on Battle.net, start the game up, and then if I have a good internet connection or the game servers aren't down, I'm able to just jump right in and play for hours. There's no overheating, there's no performance loss, there's no crashes, all of the things that I've dealt with on the ROG Ally since I got my hands on it, specifically with the one game that I really enjoy playing on it, does not become a factor on the Steam Deck. So now, knowing that, again, if I had paid for the ROG Ally, I would probably be heavily considering returning it. But if you're the kind of person who's just always known that the Steam Deck isn't for them, you don't want to deal with Linux, you don't want to deal with the Steam overlay, you're an Xbox Game Pass user for some reason, you really enjoy Epic Game Store and want a native experience there on Windows, I'm sure there's like 2 or 3 people out there who feel that way because of all the free games you get on there, then I could definitely see considering the ROG Ally over the Steam Deck. But what I have seen, and this is all anecdotal of course, is a lot of people saying that they sold their Steam Deck with the intention of getting an ROG Ally. They picked up the ROG Ally, they messed around with it for a few days, they ended up returning it to Best Buy and buying another Steam Deck, especially because of how well Valve timed this summer sale. Whether it was intentional or not, they discounted the Steam Deck by up to 20% right when people are having a lot of tech issues with its biggest competitor. And I understand that a lot of people love to throw around that the Steam Deck wasn't in a great state when it came out, but there are 2 massive differences between the Steam Deck's launch and the ROG Ally's launch. The first one is that the ROG Ally doesn't exist in a vacuum. When the Steam Deck came out, there were IA devices, there were GPD Win devices, but there weren't really as many mainstream handheld PCs as there are now, mainly because of the Steam Deck. And because of that, because of the general awareness that the Steam Deck created, the whole community that that device created for handheld PCs, it basically set a benchmark for where other competing PCs need to meet. ROG Ally kind of hits that bar for sure in the price category because it's only $100 more than the most expensive Steam Deck and gives you quite a bit more performance, which is great. And of course, the 1080p screen is awesome. The fact that it runs Windows natively out of the box is great as well. There are some real benefits there, but where it doesn't meet the bar is in terms of software and stability, and that's a big bar to meet. And then the biggest difference between the ROG Ally's launch and the Steam Deck's launch is the frequency of the updates and how fast they are to fix things. So with SteamOS, when the Steam Deck came out, there were some pretty major issues with the device, especially pre-launch when I was messing around with it. It was getting pretty much daily updates to both the graphics driver, it was getting updates behind the scenes to the overlaying Steam interface, just everything about the device was getting updates, but they were happening daily. And then when the thing came out and it got into people's hands and people started pointing out specific issues with the device, they would be updated within hours at some point. If you contrast that experience where Valve was able to have this thing fixed within around a month, they may have introduced some smaller issues as time went on, but again, they generally just turned around and fixed them within a couple of hours to a couple of days. You contrast that experience with what we're seeing on the ROG Ally, that 319 BIOS that dropped performance that massively came out over 3 weeks ago, and it took 3 weeks to hear anything about it from ASUS, and then their fix for the issue was basically to tell people that they were wrong and then release a BIOS update that doesn't fix the performance issue. There was also an AMD driver hotfix that came out that did help performance a little bit, but it did not fix the issue and get it to the point where it was with those 317 BIOS. And unless you knew where to look, your ROG Ally was not going to go ahead and update to that hotfix for you. There were plenty of Reddit posts where people had to do edits and say, look, the way you update the AMD drivers here is not to go into the Radeon software app, but you have to go into the My ASUS Live Update Center, which is kind of difficult to get to, and then you'll be able to download this hotfix, which fixes the performance somewhat, but doesn't get it back to the state that it was in. So then your real course of action was to figure out how to download those 317 BIOS and then roll them back, either through using Terminal if you don't have a dock that works with the ROG Ally, or flashing that easy setup utility to a flash drive, plugging it into a dock, plugging the dock into your ROG Ally, plugging power into the dock, and then hoping that it all works out. For me, I used the official Steam Deck dock. I plugged in the power supply, I plugged in my USB stick, never got the ROG Ally to recognize it through that dock. I tried a JSOX one, also didn't work. So what I ended up having to do was use CMD to roll back the drivers, which was a pretty difficult experience and not something that I would want to do on a device that costs $700, especially over a month after it came out. So yeah, my biggest criticism of the ROG Ally is exactly the same as it was in the video where I compared it head to head with the Steam Deck. We don't get enough responses from ASUS. We don't really know what they're working on. And when we point out huge issues with this device, instead of saying, hey, we investigated this and we can definitely see that there is a performance degradation, they turn around and say that it's just not happening. Sorry guys, we're not gonna work on that. And that is not good support in my opinion. And I really think I am ready to start pushing back on this whole sentiment that the Steam Deck is a console and the ROG Ally is a PC. The difference is the Steam Deck is a console if you want it to be, but if you want it to be a PC, that experience is sitting right there. You hold the power button, you scroll down 3 ticks, you click switch to desktop mode, and you've got a full-fledged desktop PC right there that you can plug into a dock. And it does 99% of the stuff I would want to do on my Windows PC or my Mac, but the difference is it doesn't have a ton of the bloat, and sometimes it's even fast. Whereas the ROG Ally definitely has some ways to make it feel more like a console, like of course Steam Big Picture Mode, which just basically gives it the SteamOS interface. It just doesn't work as well as SteamOS's game mode, and that's another huge reason why I enjoy using that device. So yeah, my big point here is that while the ROG Ally is good, it definitely feels like a 1.0 device, and it's a device that will definitely get better over time, but I think they're gonna save a lot of the biggest improvements for it for the eventual ROG Ally 2, whereas the Steam Deck will continue to get updates on the device that it actually is now, and it feels good despite being a 1.0 device. I think SteamOS 3.5 is really gonna wow people and show them why this thing is worth picking up over a $700 Windows PC in a handheld form, but we'll just have to wait and see, and I guess I'll come back and revisit this when SteamOS 3.5 finally drops. But yeah, after talking about the ROG Ally in that huge segment, I guess this story about the Steam Deck couldn't have come around at a better time because it just shows how good Valve is with customer support. So a Reddit user named NDAdrianM pointed out that Valve actually sent them 2 Steam Decks. And the way this happened makes a lot of sense. It doesn't really feel like that big of a mistake. Basically, this guy had the same address as the person who the second Steam Deck was supposed to go to. It was just in a different town, and Valve screwed up and sent it to the wrong person. So instead of keeping both devices and like giving it to a friend or something like that, or selling it on eBay, the person decided to reach out to Valve and let them know and say, hey, you sent me a second Steam Deck. So Valve said, hey, even though you didn't have to do that, that was pretty cool. They gave them a shipping label, got it to the person it was supposed to go to, and then a couple of days later, someone at Valve gifted Hogwarts Legacy into this person's account. Now, this is really cool for a few reasons. First of all, Valve didn't have to do anything, and I think it was cool of them to reward this person for also doing something they definitely didn't have to do. Like, they were under no legal obligation to send that device back or even let Valve know that they made a mistake. But then Valve, on the other hand, specifically picking a game that a ton of people love to play on the Steam Deck and giving it back to that person, I think was really cool, because even though it is on sale right now for 47 bucks on the Steam store, that's like a full price PC game from 10 years ago at this point. So yeah, it was a cool game to give away, and it's a game that I constantly see showing up on that top 10 list Valve puts out every month of games that are the most played on the Steam Deck. Like, really, the top 2 games on this device are Elden Ring and Hogwarts Legacy. And I'm super excited to point out that this new performance update Hogwarts Legacy got actually makes the game totally playable at a locked 30 FPS and a mix of medium and low settings with some really good implementation of FSR on the Steam Deck. And at that point, I think the game is not only playable, but a great experience on the device. But that's it for this week's update. Make sure you let me know what you think down in the comments below. And remember to subscribe and set your notifications to all if you haven't already. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.